Genesis 32 is obviously our primary text as we get back to our series in Genesis, at least for tonight, and it will be a little bit before we get back to it, but Genesis 32, and then hold your place in 2 Corinthians 3, if you could. I am always pleased with how God works. And He always seems to be coordinating the sermons and the lessons and the personal Bible reading that is taking place. He speaks to His people. He does. Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me." They hear me and they follow. So I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to hear His voice together tonight, and I would encourage you to be determined to hear Him and follow Him. And that whatever He does in your life through His Word tonight, you would follow Him. Now, I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to raise your hand if you expect to come face to face with some great difficulty in the future. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if that prospect makes you a little nervous. Raise your hand. Okay? Honesty. Okay, something is coming down the road. You know you will have to deal with it. For the people on the coast in Florida, it wasn't if the hurricane came. It was when. And that's life for us, okay? So you see the storm clouds, whether they are real or maybe they're imagined in your mind. You ever imagined a problem for tomorrow? And you were like the weather forecaster whose guess, his educated guess, was wrong? Yeah. Maybe you're unsettled, though, and you're trying to prepare for that. Well, as a Christian, to follow God and obey His will and follow Jesus forward means that we have to face difficulty. We have to. Paul told the first churches that he saw started on his first missionary journey. He said, "Through much tribulation, we must enter the kingdom." So the path to the joyful kingdom of heaven for disciples of Jesus is paved by suffering, sorrow, and difficulty. So being a Christian means that I will have to face off with difficulty. Now, sometimes that difficulty looks like this. I am moving forward in God's will. I am growing as a Christian. My life is messy and I've made some bad decisions and I'm trying to learn how to get out of making bad decisions to make right decisions. But God is at work. And now, in order to take the next step and move forward, I must face problems from my past. If I'm going to move forward, I have to face problems from my past. Sometimes the difficulty in the Christian life means dealing with very difficult people from my past. Sometimes the difficulty in the Christian life means dealing with problems that I helped cause. Say, I'd never helped cause any problems, liar. Sometimes the difficulty in the Christian life means coming face to face with people and situations and memories that I would rather forget and avoid. Yet, if I'm going to follow Jesus Christ and do God's will, sometimes those people and problems are unavoidable. I have to face them. This obviously applies to us individually as Christians, and we could have messy situations in our past where other people could have messed us over, or perhaps we are to blame some too, and having to deal with those people and situations again, it makes us very nervous. We may be tempted to deal with those things the way we used to deal with them before we knew Jesus Christ. We may be tempted to try to appease everybody and everything. Just be there's a difference between being a peacemaker Jesus way and being a politician, trying to keep everybody happy in your life. And you don't want to live here. I'd want to live here, being a peacemaker. We may struggle severely with fear. What's going to happen when I face them? Now, this applies to us collectively as a church as well. We're coming up on homecoming. Amen. We're celebrating 58 years of lifting up the gospel of Jesus Christ. The church charter July 4th, 1965. But our church hasn't always had an easy ride. Emmanuel Baptist Church, ask any of the long-standing members, had a messy situation in its past. Now, I don't bring it up to rub our noses in it, and Pastor would tell a story about the old farmer had a couple sons, and he took them out behind the barn, and he pointed to a pile of crusted over cow manure. He said, "See that, boys?" And they said, "Yeah, Dad." "Smell it?" "No." He took a stick, and he messed around with it, and he said, "Smell it now?" And they said, "Yeah." He said, "Let that be a lesson to you. Let that lie. Leave it alone." But I do bring it up to say that sometimes moving forward in God's will may require us to do some soul searching and come face to face with people and problems from our past. And while other people may have caused serious issues in our lives, we may not be entirely scot-free of any blame or need for repentance ourselves. We're humans, we're sinners. To ignore that fact will keep us from moving forward. Are you with me tonight? So sometimes to move forward in the will of God requires that I go back and face my past. So here's the question posed by this text, Genesis chapter 32. How did Jacob prepare to face his past? You say, what do you mean? How did Jacob prepare to face Esau? Remember Esau? A further question developed this. When was Jacob prepared to face Esau? When? See, what we're going to see, Jacob did everything he could to be prepared to come face to face with the brother who wanted to kill him 20 years ago. And when was he truly prepared to face his brother? So this story about Jacob's fretful night before the fateful face-off with his brother will help us answer this question. When are we truly prepared to face our past and problems? We can be truly prepared. We can be. We can. How? When are we truly prepared to face the past? Let me remind you first of Jacob's past. Remember, Isaac and Rebekah were his parents. Couldn't have children for a long time, and Isaac prayed and sought God for Rebekah's womb, that she could give birth to children. And of course, she conceived. The Lord was entreated of Isaac. And when she was pregnant, there was a war within her. And she went and asked God about this, and God, because He is God, He knows the future, and He told her there's 2 nations within your womb. And He told her that the older child in her womb would serve the younger child, and the younger would rule over the older child. So not long after that, of course, she gave birth to the boys, and from the moment of their birth, they were at each other. Jacob, the heel catcher, grabbing on the Esau's heel as Big Red Harry's coming out of the womb. Okay? You then have the favoritism that Isaac had for Esau and Rebekah had for Jacob. Isaac, even though he knew likely what his wife knew about these 2 boys, that the younger would serve the older, he played favorites with Esau because he liked the meat Esau had to cook him. And of course, Rebekah, being the loving, nurturing type she was, favored the one that wasn't favored. And so now we have a family that is at civil war with each other. And it showed up, of course, in the kids. You know, a lot of times, kids probably learn how to fight from somebody. They learn how to be at odds with one another because of somebody. And I wonder who that somebody is. So you have Jacob the supplanter and Esau the hairy red guy, and so it's Jacob versus Esau. Of course, Jacob tricks Esau out of his birthright for a bowl of beans. Esau is carnal, he's worldly, he doesn't care about the things of God, he's doing his own thing, he's living his own life, he's following his heart, he's living for Esau and what makes Esau feel good, what Esau thinks is right. And Isaac, of course, still favors him for some reason. And Jacob is over here, and he's doing the manipulative, deceitful thing that his mother taught him. And so Isaac comes to the age where he wants to bless Esau. Even though Esau has proven he's not the one that's to be blessed. God already knew about this ahead of time. This wasn't God's plan. This wasn't what God knew. This wasn't what God had revealed. And Esau, why wasn't it what God wanted? Because of Esau's character. It was obvious how worldly he was. he was not to be the one that would receive the blessing of Isaac and Abraham, and yet Isaac went to bless him anyways. Well, we know the story. Rebekah concocted a plan so that Jacob would trick Isaac and steal Esau's blessing, and when the plan worked out and Jacob tricked Isaac and stole Esau's blessing, Esau comes in and finds out about it, and he's heaping mad. So mad that he wanted to kill Jacob. Well, Rebekah and Isaac sent Jacob away to Rebekah's brother Laban. And Jacob ran from Esau, and he ran right into God. Genesis 28. He's on his way to Uncle Laban, and he's laying on a rock or something at night. And he has a dream. Now, this is very important to where we're going tonight. He has a dream, and he sees this ladder ascending to heaven, and there's angels going up and coming down the ladder. Angels of God, messengers of God, ministers of God. And at the top of the ladder, there's God, and God speaks to him, and he says, I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And there God said, listen, Jacob, just as I blessed Abraham, and just as I blessed Isaac, I'm going to bless you. Now, this was crazy. This was grace in Jacob's life that he did not deserve. God appeared to him. He didn't deserve for God to get his attention like this and to talk to him. So God speaks to him, and he basically assures him of those same promises that he made to his grandfather and his father. I'm going to give you the land where you are right now, and I'm going to multiply your seed, so like the sand by the seashore, like the stars in the heaven, you can't even count them. And I'm going to be a God to you. And listen, Jacob, you're leaving home right now. You're going away from home right now. But guess what? I'm going to be with you. And I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to keep you. I am going to protect you all the way, and I will be your God. And Jacob, of course, woke up from that dream, and what a wonderful encounter. But Jacob spent 20 years away from home, and the problems he helped cause there, and he ran into new problems with his uncle, right? Didn't he? Well, I don't have time to re-preach the last couple chapters. Okay? New problems with his uncle and new problems with his family, and that the cause of it all was Jacob. He was responsible for all the problems he caused. Why do you say that? He reaped what he sowed with Laban. He deceived, he was deceived. His family problems. He should have stopped at one wife. He knew what God said to that point. In Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, that a man should leave father and mother and cleave unto his wife. And even though he was deceived, don't look at me funny, God never advocated for polygamy in the Bible. Even though Jacob was deceived into marrying Leah, he should have said, Rachel, I love you, honey. But this is what God says. You say, well, what about the Messianic line? As far as I recall, Leah was the mother of Judah. Through whom did Jesus come into this world but the line of Judah? Are you with me? So God works in spite of our mess. But Jacob's messy family was Jacob's fault. Because he went along with the love of his life and married in spite of the will of God. Okay, so then after 20 years, God brought Jacob back. He tells him to go back home. Now, before chapter 32, realize that God had been watching over Jacob's return. And God protected Jacob along the way. Okay? So chapter 31, Laban's in hot pursuit of Jacob. He's running and gunning after Jacob. And Jacob's afraid of him, afraid he's going to hurt him. God protected Jacob in Genesis 31. I don't have time to re-preach that either. God was with Jacob. He kept his promise. He kept Jacob. He protected Jacob. And so there are two things we know to be true as Jacob headed home. There was difficulty behind him that God took care of. There was difficulty in front of him that God promised to take care of. God was with him no matter what. And as you follow God, and as you run into problems of your own making, there's going to be difficult. And as you follow God to do the will of God and move forward, you're probably going to run into problems again. But all along the way, God has promised, hey, I'm going to be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you, Jesus Christ said. He's the same yesterday and today and forever in spite of whatever problems you face. So as Jacob journeyed home, God was with him. But as we enter Genesis 32, Esau was coming. Now look at Genesis 32 and verse 1. As Jacob has left one troublemaker behind, Laban, and now he's turning his gaze toward home. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Oh, now, wait a minute. The angels of God. When was the last time Jacob had an encounter with angels of God? It was when he left the promised land. It was in Genesis 28 when he had that dream and he had that encounter with God and God spoke to him. And so now he's going home and angels of God meet him. Who thinks this is a positive thing? If there was a sign, who thinks this is it? Of God saying, hey, I'm with you. He's running into angels. In fact, he named the place in verse 2, he named it Mahanaim, which means two camps or two hosts or two encampments, okay? So here's Jacob's family and here's the angels of God that meet him. And it felt like this, it's not just us, it's also God's camp. It's also God's angels. God is watching over us. God is protecting us. This should have been very encouraging as he was headed home. God is known as the Lord of hosts. That doesn't mean he likes to host people. And now he would host you. Okay, don't get me wrong. We're not talking about hosts and like Little Debbie cakes and hostess snacks and stuff like that. That's not what it's talking about. Hosts means armies. God is the God of angel armies. And they were meeting Jacob. And they were with him. Now what more do you need if the angels of God are with you? And so he calls it Mahanaim. But in spite of that, he's still got to face Esau. So verse 3. Remember, Jacob is very much a man of self-initiative and a man who's going to get his hands on everything and work it out his way. And he's still struggling with that. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the country of Edom, which is where Esau had settled. Edom, the Mount Seir. Jacob sent his messengers, he commanded them, saying, thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau. Now wait a minute, time out. Who was supposed to be lord over who? God said before they were born that Jacob would be the lord of the elder. He would be the master of the elder. He would rule the elder, right? When Isaac blessed Jacob, thinking it was Esau, he said, be lord over your brethren. So who really was superior when it came to the blessing, when it came to the inheritance? When it came to God's plan, who was superior? It was Jacob. But he's saying to Jacob, my lord, or he's saying to Esau, my lord Esau. He's trying to placate this thing. He's trying to smooth this thing over, isn't he? And he calls himself, thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban. I've stayed there until now. So he's explaining where he's been the past 20 years. And here I have oxen and asses, flocks and men servants, women servants. He's explaining all the things he's gained, all the things he has. And he's saying these things, why? I have sent to tell my Lord that I might find grace in thy sight. Jacob's coming in like this, almost crawling. I think he's scared to death what Esau's going to do to him. And so the messengers go with Jacob's message, and they come back. Verse 6, the messengers return to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau. And they don't say they have a message from him, but this is what they do know. We have a report. Also, he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Now, you're Jacob. And the last time you saw your brother, you made him heaping mad. And he wanted to kill you. And now you're going home and you're trying to placate him, you're trying to appease him, and you send a message to him. No message comes back besides action. Here comes Esau and 400 men are coming with him. Your stomach just hit the floor. And that's what happened to Jacob, because look at verse 7. It says, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He's out of his mind. He's scared to death. He's worried, because it'd be one thing if it was just Jacob coming back. But now it's not just Jacob. It is 4 women and 11 children and all these animals and all these servants and all these people that he has with him. And here's an army coming with Esau. Even though Jacob had just before this confidently said, this is Mahanaim, here's our host and here's the Lord's host. Here's these angels. Now he's looking at Esau's host and he's scared out of his mind. In spite of the reality that the angels had just met him, giving him that assurance. And so, what does he do? He divided the people that was with him. He starts using his ingenuity like we know him to do. We've seen this already. We saw him with Laban and the goats as he had to stay 7 more years. We saw him use his thinking skills and use his abilities and use his mind and try to work this thing out and work all the edges to make it work out. And so he does that again. He divided the people that was with him and the flocks and herds and the camels into 2 bands and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. So Jacob believed, if we divide in half and we'll put all the servants and the animals in this group and we'll have all the family in this group, and so that if Esau hits this group, at least we can make a break for it with this group. He's got a backup plan. He's got a plan B. He has an escape hatch. And then he prayed. You ever do a lot of planning and preparing and then pray? Now his prayer is very good. It's very good. And so it's good to pray when you're afraid. I think it's better to pray first. What do you think? So he prayed. Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which said... Now remember, he's praying out of fear. So if I pray out of fear, I'm probably praying like I've drank 4 cups of coffee and it's midnight and I can't fall asleep and I can't get my heart, I don't even know what I'm saying. You ever been there? Help me. Okay. I imagine that's where he was, but he's praying, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, the Lord which says to me, return unto thy country and thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. So he's acknowledging the God of his grandfather, the God of his father. He's saying, you're the God who told me to come back and face this. You're the God who told me if I would come back that you would deal well with me. He's reminding God of his promises. Did God need to be reminded of his promises? No, but often prayer, in a way, is us communicating to God what he already knows so he can assure us of what we know he knows. Are you with me? We've got to be assured of what he knows because we know what he knows. Now, not in every circumstance, but we know what he has promised, and we know what God's purpose is, and we know that God wants to do well to us, but oftentimes we're scared out of our minds, and we're going to God, and we are telling God what he has already promised us, as if he's not going to keep his word. And so he said in verse 10, he's very humble here, I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies, and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. And he's right. This is very key. He acknowledged the mercies of God in his life. He's like, I don't deserve your mercies, your truth that you've showed me. And God, I'm your servant. Why? Because with my staff I passed over Jordan. So when he was on the run from his family and his problems, all he had was a shepherd's staff in his hand. And now when he was coming back, he had become 2 bands or 2 large groups. So God, I don't deserve what you've done for me. And look at all this. You're the one who told me to come back. You're the one who said you'd do well with me. And I don't deserve what you've already done for me. So please, verse 11, please rescue me. Deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. I'm afraid of him. He's honest with God about what he fears. Do you need to talk to God about what you fear? He said, I'm afraid of him. I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. This isn't just about me, God. Because when I was young and dumb, I helped cause these problems. My brother's an angry fool. And it'd be one thing if it was just me going back to face him. But God, it's not just me anymore. I have a family. And I'm afraid of what he's going to do. And he again reminded God, thou saidst, I will surely do thee good and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered nor for multitude. In other words, God, you promised my offspring would be innumerable. But if Esau strikes us and kills us and wipes out my family because of his anger and because of his vengeance, how is that promise of yours going to work out? So again, was Jacob praying to remind God of his promises or to remind himself? So he gets done praying and he lodged there that same night. But he can't sleep. And he's not quite done preparing. Okay, so in this chapter, you should feel Jacob is doing a lot of preparing to face his brother because he's nervous and afraid. The amount of time he prayed compared to the time he's trying to figure everything out and make everything work. Here's the prayer, and here's Jacob preparing. Who feels like that's a little lopsided? That's a little imbalanced. Now, you can spend all your time praying and never do any good, and never use your God-given brain and use your God-given Bible and use the wisdom that is from above to serve God. But I'm just telling you, if when you face your problems and the things you fear, your preparation to handle those things is this much, and your time talking to God about this is this much, that's a little lopsided. And that was the case with Jacob. And so here he is, he can't sleep, he's staying there that same night. He took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. And he took 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats and 200 ewes, that's sheep, and 20 rams. 30 milch camels, those would have been milking or nursing camels with their colts. So 30 mother camels with their babies, and 40 kine. Kine would have been heifers or cattle, and 10 bulls. So you have the heifers with the bulls, and 20 she-asses, and 10 foals, which would have been he-asses, so the donkeys that are together. So he gets this gift together for his brother. And he gives, verse 16, he gives these animals to his servants, and he has them split up in droves or in groups. So he's got the goats and then the sheep and then this group and then this group of animals and this group. Okay, do you see it? Now stay with me. Are you with me? Nod your head. Amen. Amen. Okay. So he has these divided in groups, and he has the plan. And he says to his servants, pass over before me. Look at that, verse 16. Pass over before me. Put a space betwixt drove and drove. So he's going to time this out just right. He's going to plan this out just right. Here's the goats, and here's the sheep, and there's a space. And here's the sheep, and here's the camels, and there's a space, and a space. And I'm going to time it out just right. And there's going to be servants with each of these groups. And he says to the servant at the front of the pack, with the goats, he says, verse 17, when Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, whose art thou? Who do you work for? And whither goest thou? Where are you going? And whose are these before thee? Well, these animals, who do these belong to? When Esau meets you with his 400 men, and he's like, what's this all about? He sees a servant and he sees all these goats. Okay? Verse 18, then thou shalt say, they be thy servant Jacob's. Remember Jacob, your servant that's coming to see you, who wants to find grace in your sight? These belong to him. And he's your servant, by the way. He's your servant. And it's a present. It's a present, Esau. I'm coming home, and when I come home, I'm going to give you a present. Jacob was not demanding a welcome home gift, was he? He was bringing a gift home because he was afraid of what he would meet at the door. It's a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also, he's behind us. So in other words, the servant with the group of animals at the front would say, when he ran into Esau, he's like, look at all these animals. These are your servants Jacob's. These are a present for you, and Jacob's coming too. And so Jacob told every servant with every group of animals, spaced out appropriately, at appropriate intervals, to hit Esau with humility and grace and gifts. Now this kind of sounds like, now I would actually use this. Grant Boyd told me one time now to get information from some certain blue-collar workers. He'd show up with some Chick-fil-A biscuits and make friends, and he'd get what he needs. It reminds me of that. Not quite the same, okay? But you know what this is called? Buttering up Big Brother. Space it out just right. We're going to time this just right. We're going to space this out just right. We're going to, Jacob here, he's trying to save his own neck. We're going to manipulate this. He's still got this in him. We're going to manipulate this and use the power of our intellect and our persuasion to make Esau love us again. So he commanded the rest of the servants to do that. And his reasoning, what was his reasoning? Look at verse 20. Middle of the verse. For he said, I will appease him. This will pacify the past. This will take care of it. I will appease him with the present that goeth before me. And then afterward, after the present's gone, then I'll see his face, and maybe, peradventure, maybe he will accept of me. And that language in the Hebrew means basically to lift up the face. In other words, it's like a servant who's done wrong coming to the king. And is the king going to banish him? Is the king going to execute him? And he comes to the king and his face is low and to the ground. And he's trying to appease the king. And the king would reach down and either touch him with his scepter or lift up his head. And if they came face to face, the king would show the servant mercy. In this case, Jacob's coming crawling to Esau, hoping to pacify Esau's anger. And Esau, he's hoping, if I pacify him and then he sees my face, he'll lift up my face and Esau will show me mercy. He's hoping for that. So we got all that ready. A big red bow. And he sent the present over before him. And he lodged that night in the company. But again, he couldn't sleep. And he wasn't quite done preparing. He rose up that night. He had already split up into two groups, the servants, the animals, and he's done his plan with that. I mean, he's going to plan out every square inch of this thing. He's going to touch every square inch of this thing to make sure things work out with Esau. He's going to get his hands on everything, and even when he's using his skill and his persuasion and his manipulation to resolve this with Esau, he's still not sure it's going to work out, isn't he? The second group was his family. So he took his family, he took his 2 wives, his 2 women servants, and his 11 sons. He passed over the ford Jabbok. That wasn't the first ford before the Model T, okay? That's a ford that's an easy place to cross a river. The stream Jabbok flowed into the Jordan River. And it was a way to enter into the land, and that ford was an easy place where he could cross with his family. And so he took them over that crossing. He sent them over the brook, and he sent over what he had. And then Jacob was left alone. Now you ask me, or I ask you, at this point, who thinks Jacob was truly prepared to face Esau? And even if all his planning and scheming might come out for a success, and he did all that he could to prepare by his hands, who thinks he was truly prepared in his heart? No. So here's Jacob, and he's alone. And it's exactly where he needed to be. And it's dark. Night has fallen. I'd turn off the lights if I could, and you wouldn't be creeped out. Talk to you in the dark. And while he's alone, remember, he's expecting Esau to come, who hates him, or he thought hates him, who he thinks wants to kill him. And he's expecting a fight for his life. And now he's in the dark, he's alone, and a man shows up and starts wrestling with him. Now, given the circumstances, if you were Jacob, who are you thinking is wrestling with you? I mean, your mind is messing you over. And a man was wrestling with him, and the man wrestled with him until daybreak. And finally, about daybreak, the man who was wrestling Jacob saw that he wasn't going to prevail against Jacob. Now, it wasn't that he couldn't prevail, and we're going to see that in a minute. It wasn't that he couldn't prevail against Jacob. It was that he saw Jacob is not giving up. Jacob's in the fight for his life. Jacob is going home. He fought for his life with Laban. He's been in the middle of a cat fight with his wives, his 4 wives. That was of his own doing. He's been around conflict and chaos since he was born. And he's going home. And he's in this fight, and he's alone, and it's like he's wrestling, and he doesn't want to give up. He's been wrestling his whole life. And he's tired of wrestling. And so he's not giving up on this fight. And it says that the man who wrestled him saw he couldn't prevail against him. And so it says he touched the hollow of his thigh. Some say it could be his hip bone. That thing. Others say it could be another area that is rather a bad place to get hurt or hit when you are in a wrestling match. Okay. Either way, the man, he touched him. In other words, he smote him in the hollow of his thigh, and it put Jacob's thigh out of joint. So in other words, again, it wasn't that this man who was wrestling with him couldn't take him. Are you with me? He could take him. And he proved it. Why? Because he touched him. And his thigh's out of joint. But Jacob still wasn't going to give up. And he didn't give up. Look at what he said. It said his thigh was at a joint as he wrestled with him, but he wouldn't give up. In fact, by the time daybreak came, the man says, "Hey, let me go. It's daylight. Aren't you tired of this? Aren't you hurting enough?" I mean, can you imagine wrestling with someone and you have a bone at a joint? Oh my word. This reminds me of Rick and that guy at his at Delta. His shoulder keeps popping at a joint. A year and a half. And he'll just call Rick up and be like, I went to lay in my bed and my shoulder just boop and just pop out, and he's like, you got to do something about that, But then, can you imagine wrestling someone with a broken arm? And the guy's like, let me go, Jacob. Aren't you in pain? The day is going to break. And watch why. We find out why Jacob wouldn't let him go. He says, I will not let thee go except thou bless me. Wait a minute. That's spiritual language. He is realizing something. I'm not wrestling just any man. And I will not let you go until you bless me. And I have the confidence that I am going to face my brother and face my past and my problems with your blessing. And the man was willing to do that for him, but look what he said. He said, what is thy name? What's your name? And Jacob had to admit something, didn't he? I'm supplanter. I'm Jacob. See, he wrestles with this man, but really the real wrestle was with who he was. And this man who could have wiped him out and killed him, but who merely injured him to get his attention. He said, you want to be blessed? Who are you? What's your name? And Jacob had to admit, I'm the cause of all the problems I've ever experienced since I saw you last and before. And he said, when Jacob told the man his name, the man said this, that's not your name anymore. You've been defined by manipulation and deceit and supplanting and tripping up. You've been living the Jacob life and living up to your name, trying to control everything, but that's not your name anymore. Your name is Israel. You know what Israel means? A prince of God. And you know why he named him Israel? He said, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men and hast prevailed. Now wait a second. Jacob did not win that wrestling match. He just hung on for dear life. If anything, the other guy should have won by default because Jacob's bone was at a joint. And yet it was in Jacob's weakness, in Jacob's brokenness, that he found blessing, and he found a new name, and he found a purpose that transcended everything in his life, a name that would characterize him and his people for the rest of eternity. And look at verse 29. Jacob is like, well, I have a new name, but why don't please tell me your name? And the guy says, why do you need to know my name? Why do you need to know my name? That's irrelevant. And the man blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. And you know what that means? It means the face of God. He called it that. He said, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Your life's preserved. Time's up in the wrestling match. Can you hang with me? It's okay. Can you hang with me for 5 more minutes? Come on. I've seen God face to face and my life is preserved. In other words, I have wrestled with God and God did not kill me. Though he knows who I was and what I have been and that I deserve all I have coming to me when I face my brother, I have wrestled face to face with God and he did not kill me. In other words, I have come face to face with God and his mercy. See, Jacob was trying to buy back and earn mercy from who? Esau. And he wrestled with God. Actually, God wrestled with him to come face to face with who he was and the fact he needed and would only be blessed because of God's mercy. And it was only the mercy of God, his faithful, loving kindness to Jacob, that would guarantee Esau would not hurt him. That was it. So Jacob, verse 31, he's passing over Peniel and the sun comes up. And this is what he's doing. This is how, watch, this is how he's walking. He's got a reminder about his weakness. He's got a reminder about God coming face to face with him and needing God's mercy. He has a reminder. In fact, it became such a reminder. Verse 32 talks about the children of Israel want to eat a certain part of meat of an animal because of this event. In other words, this event in Jacob's life was such a turning point for him and for his descendants that they forever didn't eat of something to remember what Jacob had went through, to remember God's mercy to him. What is the point? What is the point here? Okay. And we're going to find out what happens when he does face Esau in Genesis chapter 33. But Jacob was not truly prepared to face Esau. He wasn't prepared to face his past and his promise. It didn't matter how much he tried to prepare. He couldn't calm down his heart. He couldn't guarantee that Esau was going to give him mercy. But he was truly prepared when he came face to face with the God who loved him and showed him mercy. That's when he was prepared to face Esau. He's confident in the blessing of God and the preservation of his life and the success of God's plan for him. It had nothing to do with his intellect. It had nothing to do with his ability. It had nothing to do with his skills and his prowess and his people's skills and his ability to please everybody and their mother and find mercy with everybody and their mother. It didn't have anything to do with that. It had everything to do with the fact that he was weak and God was strong and he was hanging on to God and God could have killed him and God would have reminded him, Jacob, you're weak and you're worthless apart from me, but in my mercy, I am making you into something much more. Let me ask you this. You're a Christian, right? You're born again, child of God. Where did you come face to face with God and his mercy? Where do you come face to face with the glory of the Lord? Where do you come face to face where the Spirit of God is that sets us free to live in love and courage and boldness, where we're not characterized by our past, where we don't have to act like we used to in the past, where we don't have to control things and manipulate things anymore. It's not about who we were or what we've done, and we don't bring that lifestyle into our new life with God and try to manipulate everything and everybody. Where was it did you meet the mercy of God and find the truth that your future is secure and God is with you and you're forgiven and you have a fresh start and a new name, and you can do it. You can face your Esau's, and you can face your past, and you can face your problems, and you can even be merciful and humble in the process. Where did you behold the glory of God but in the face of Jesus Christ? And when you heard the gospel and God started wrestling with you and saying, Jacob, tap. Richard, tap out. How? Let it go. Keith, submit to me. Jim, surrender. And the Holy Ghost started working in your heart with the message of the gospel telling you, you're a sinner. But I came and I took your place because of my love for you. And I am extending you mercy. And I'm going to totally change you from who you were to what you will be. That's where you met the mercy of God. So aren't you prepared to face anything from your past? And any problem that you're scared to death of? Church, aren't we prepared to deal with the hurts that others have caused this church in the past, and even deal with how we could have contributed to those hurts? How do we deal with those things? We come right back to the foot of the cross, where God has shown us mercy. And he has said, this was your name. Will you admit it? This was who you were. Will you admit it? But that's not who you are anymore. You are truly prepared to face your past and your problems when you have come face to face with God and his mercy in Christ Jesus.